Welcome to All In, Always by Nada Bystander, where we have candid conversations with and about the people who show up when it matters most, the unsung heroes in our hometowns, first responders, and military veterans. No scripts, no filters, just real talk about the job, the life, and everything that comes with it. So let's get into it. So when I was 22, I decided that I was going to enlist in the Navy. And there was a lot of motivators for me to do that. One of them being I was with a woman that I knew I was going to spend the rest of my life with. She had a young son when I met them, and I was not really doing anything with my life. Up until that point, I was living from house to house, basically couch surfing. At least I wasn't homeless because I had been there, but I had friends that saved me so I didn't have to live outdoors, at least for a long period of time. But then I met my wife, and a lot changed. All of a sudden, I had to aspire to be something better than I was. And I held down quite a few jobs, but what I did know was it wasn't really doing much. And it wasn't something that I could see myself doing for the rest of my life. And that was waiting tables. And nothing against people who do that. I also bartended as well. The service industry is an amazing place to be. And I think it builds character and personality into somebody that didn't originally have it. For me, it wasn't a career choice that I could see myself being successful in. Let's just put it that way. And so we started living together. I started realizing that I wasn't going to be able to take care of them doing what I was doing, much less myself. I mean, I was struggling. She was doing much better than I was. And together we decided at some point in early 1997, after we'd been together for about a year, that there are options. And when I was bartending, there was a man that come in and he worked at a place similar to the CAT Institute. And if anybody knows, or if anybody has seen commercials for that when they were kids growing up, you would know that it's a computer-aided drafting school. Its primary focus is obviously AutoCAD. And I saw that as a career change. And I saw this gentleman that was coming into my bar quite frequently as one of my regulars who was one of the registrars, and he talked me into it, brought me a bunch of reading material to kind of get to know the idea. And when I was a kid, not for nothing, watching like the Brady Bunch, and Mike Brady was an architect, and the guy designed his own house, and they were pretty well off, it would seem. This could possibly be a good career choice, and I need to make the steps that I need to take in order to be able to join that group of people who are contributing to society in a positive way. And that's having a career and being able to take care of your family. So I had the conversation with my then fiance at the time and said, hey, I'm thinking about maybe doing this. Waiting tables isn't something I could see myself doing for the rest of my life. And it definitely isn't a way to support a family, especially if we were going to get larger in size. And so we looked at how much it costs. And of course, I was driving the struggle bus, so there was no way that I was going to be able to pay for that. And she mentioned that her cousin had recently enlisted. And I know that a large portion of her family was in the Navy. Her uncle was in the Navy. Her grandfather was in the Navy. My grandfather was in the service. He was in the Korean War as a Marine. And I have a great uncle as well that was in the Navy too. So there was a little bit of history, a little bit of background there, but it wasn't so much so that it was in my face all the time that it was kind of an easy option. For some people, they grew up with that. They're either military brats or they have family members that are doing that. The fact of the matter is a lot of that generational motivation comes from being in a family where you're surrounded by it or you're familiar with it. For me, it wasn't really like that. It was kind of on the peripheral. I knew of some people that had been in the military. And as a kid growing up, I never knew anybody that said, hey, I think the military is going to give me that structure that I need in my life in order to be successful. So I didn't even think about it. And so I knew that I had to do something. So it was important that I made the right choices and I kind of dove into what could I be doing? And I kind of fell into that path where I'm going to do something that I can have a conversation with somebody else about that's going to make sense to me and kind of follow in their footsteps. And that person was my wife's cousin. I got all that secondhand knowledge from him even before going to the recruiter to find out more. Unfortunately, at the time, I had only gotten my GED, and because I had been living from house to house as a kid and I had left home at such an early age, I didn't graduate school traditionally. And so back then it was peacetime. So they didn't really have a need. I'm sure their end strength was just fine as far as manning goes. And they weren't really hurting for personnel to enlist in the military services. So you couldn't have a GED to come in. You had to have a high school diploma. And there was no making any concessions for that. Not to mention the fact that I had trouble with the law, and what kid at my age hadn't run into the old Johnny 5-0 or dabbled in some drugs and whatnot. But all of those things they ask you during the questionnaire process and say, hey, listen, if you don't answer us truthfully, it's going to look bad for you later. And they always throw out these urban myths about it could go on your record if you lie to us. And they make it a bigger deal than what it is, knowing what I know now. In any case, so I divulged all that stuff. Obviously, I didn't know any better. My wife kept telling me, because she had been in the Navy for 2 or 3 years before she even met me. So she was telling me the same thing. Hey, don't worry about it. Tell them what you need to tell them. And of course, they're pretty convincing when you're in the recruiter's office and they're saying some stuff. Not only are they convincing about what you're going to be doing and how great it's going to be, but they're also pretty convincing of what could happen to you if you don't tell them the facts. So I kind of went on the safer side and gave them a little bit of the truth and not all of it. But that was a point in my life where I realized that I did want to do something bigger than myself. I had no idea what was in store for me, and I didn't want to divert. Even if I had cold feet and I was thinking, I don't want to do this. This doesn't sound like me. This doesn't feel like me. And I don't want to force myself into a position or a place or a mindset that I didn't want to be in. But at the time, I wouldn't say I was desperate. I just wanted to be better. And if I'm being honest, I'm not really thinking about serving my country and being the best person I can be altruistically to go out and do this selfless act of saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to go do my military service, and wherever that leads me, that leads me. And it's not like we were in the middle of a war and there was the threat of being killed or something. People don't think about that anyway when they do enlist, because that's not why most people go into the military. I think in my case, and I don't speak for everybody, but I did need some structure in my life. I needed a path to something, even if I didn't think it was going to become a career, because I didn't. The point is I needed to do something with my life. The Navy became that thing. Going through the enlistment process, I didn't realize was going to be a hurdle. I thought it was going to be a lot easier than it was. I had some tidbits of information that I had gotten from family members about. These are the things that you want to think about when you're talking to that recruiter, namely the job that you're going to have while you're in, because something like that, you should want it to translate into something that's going to make sense for the civilian world. It's important to choose a job that could potentially become a career, whether you stay in or not. So college money, Montgomery GI Bill, having something so I can get out after my enlistment and then go to this CAD institute and learn how to do computer-aided drafting and maybe someday potentially chase an architectural degree. Who knows, right? But primary motivating factor for joining the military for me at the time was I needed to support my family. I wanted college money in order to be able to create that opportunity for a career in order to be able to do that. And I wasn't even thinking about the Navy as a career. So I joined and I shipped out not long after me and my wife got married. So not even a month later, and I'm already leaving my new family to go away somewhere. And granted, I was only going to Chicago, Illinois, Great Lakes, the only Navy boot camp in the nation. I went there, and as a 22-year-old, I thought I had most of life figured out. I wasn't a kid. I knew most of the recruits that I was going to be with in boot camp were going to be somewhat younger than me, because the recruiters come to the high schools and there's JROTC there, and they can pick people, and they're there doing career fairs, and they are just sucking up these gullible kids into the military. And that's where most of them come from. And not to say that the kids are gullible. I just wonder if they go home and they have a long conversation with their parents and they have time to actually take in all there is to take in about the options that they have for themselves. Not everybody is a straight A student. Not everybody gets a scholarship. Not everybody can go to college, right? Sometimes college isn't even for everybody for what they want to do. Either way you look at it, it's a matter of, did they have an opportunity to think it over? Because it's a huge life decision. And it's one of the first ones that they're going to make out the door. right? You throw that cap and gown on the bed when you get home, and then what's next? In the summer months, right after that, you're shipping out. So you don't even really have time to enjoy the fruits of your labor, so to speak, to be able to enjoy that summer off, that first summer where you know that you may or may not be doing anything in the fall. If you're going to college, cool, right? You're gearing up for that. If you decide you're going to kind of linger around a little bit, you've already got a job that gives you steady money to be able to live on. In some cases, you're living at home and mom and pop pay the bills and you got a bunch of spending money for yourself, or you may be saving to move out. But for me, I didn't really have that opportunity. So I'm always wondering, what did those conversations with them kids sound like talking to their parents? How many of those kids have parents that were in the military and made it an easy choice? Or on the other side of that spectrum, maybe they got parents that are against the military. They don't want to see their young Billy or Susie go off to some foreign land because a lot of times military doesn't get good press. So you've got parents who are a little hesitant about letting their baby girl or their baby boy out of the nest to go do something crazy like that. And so 1997, you're not really thinking crazy. Cold War is over and there's no active conflicts happening. So it might have been an easy choice. It might have been an easy discussion with mom and dad. For me, it was a conversation that I had prior to getting married. We knew exactly what we wanted to do. It was more of like a family decision, but let's move on. So boot camp is quite the experience, and it's nothing like you see on TV one way or the other. I think everybody's perception of what boot camp is actually like versus what they've seen on TV versus what they experience in real life, I think is just different. I think it's different for everybody. I think it's different depending on what's going on in your head at the time. I think it's different depending on what your upbringing was like. Everybody has a different angle at which they take in life. And so for me, the boot camp experience was kind of mundane. There was times where it was just tedious. And then there was other times where I was like, what the hell am I doing here? But I think everybody goes through these stages when they show up at boot camp and throughout that really define who you are. And I think those stages are okay, and they probably are pretty standard for everybody that goes through, especially when they start breaking you down, which is from the fucking get-go. So I think what I'll do is I'll kind of bounce back and forth between when I was a drill instructor, for those of you that don't know what a RDC is, because in the Navy, we're called Recruit Division Commanders, and we're the ones that wear the red ropes and curse at the recruits and make them do push-ups, right? So there's more to it than that. But I'm going to bounce back and forth because I'm going to couple my experience at boot camp from two different lenses. So that way there's some context there, because it's hard to understand unless I think you've seen both sides of that. We'll flash back for a second and we'll talk about the plane ride seemed endless. And there was nobody on that plane. I think we took a red-eye flight, and it was like 11 o'clock at night. I remember my wife and my son was there at the airport back when we were still allowed to see each other off in the terminals and we can go to the gates and do all those things that we can't do anymore. But they saw me off and I got on the airplane, and there was, I swear to God, it felt like there was only 12 people on there and we were all going to the same place. And so I do remember I laid across all three seats because that's how open the airplane was. And from Phoenix, where we took off from, to Chicago, I believe, is about a 3 or a 4 hour flight. And I was going to some place that I had never been before, but Chicago, nope. In November, come on. The only thing that I knew was what my wife prepped me for, since she was from there, was that it was going to be cold and miserable and probably snowing. And she was right on all accounts. So the airplane ride, I slept the whole way, probably because sleeping is like the best time machine ever. The next thing you know, you wake up and you're wherever you need to be. And so we get off there and go to the USO where we're supposed to gather. We've got these instructions that are kind of haphazard, and you're going to find a bunch of other people because, of course, being central to the nation for boot camp, everybody's coming from everywhere. So even though there was only a handful of us on that one airplane, there was a bunch of airplanes coming from other places around that same time. And so the method is you gather up in one location, and it's called mustering. And a lot of us already know that. But for those of you that don't, it just means that you gather all in the same place. You take a head count. They put somebody in charge of your little group, and then you hang out and wait for the inevitable, which is somebody coming to grab you up, yell curse words at you and call you some slanderous names and put you on a bus and take you to a place that you probably don't want to be for the next 9 weeks. And so that's exactly what happened. we got picked up. We all jumped on this bus. The first thing they do is they throw a video in the VHS player, and it's kind of an onboarding thing. Hey, this is what you can expect when you get there, kind of to prep you and not to raise any expectations, but mostly to lower them. There is a specific thing that boot camp does. And if you're old enough to understand it and mature enough to reason with it, then you know that when you get there, all hell's going to break loose. And so that's kind of what they showed on the video. And then we get there and we get off the bus. And right away, of course, you got somebody in your face and they're yelling at you and they're cursing and they're doing all those things that if you had abusive parents, it would probably trigger you, not to use a woke word, but it is what it is, right? So it's part of our vernacular these days. So yes, and they taught you that as a company commander or a recruit division commander, that you have to be aware that people come from different cultures, different backgrounds, and different ways of life. And some of those recruits come from a very hostile environment, we'll say. And so it was important for us as the leaders to understand that when these recruits come in, if you see anything like that, then you've got to back off. But, nobody knows that. And nobody's going to say anything anyway. It was just to prepare you because people do come from abusive families. And in some cases, they're trying to get away from that. And that's the whole reason that they join. So it is. You get there, and if you've lived with it and you've grown up with it, and that was just commonplace for you in life, you kind of let it roll off you like water off a duck's back. But in other cases, it might get to you. And I think there's a little bit of that that's necessary. So you're in this new environment. It is 100%, it feels 100% hostile, at least until you realize that there's a reason for the season, so to speak. And so you're all lined up. They're telling you all these different things to do. You may have 3 or 4 people yelling at you, 3 or 4 different instructions, and that's all meant to be. It is meant to get you frazzled, meant to get you in a place where you don't know if you made the right decision. They're not trying to weed you out. I mean, that definitely comes later, and that's easier to do later on, but not when you first get there. When you first get there, the whole thing is to kind of shock and awe, hurry up and wait type of situation like you're taught in the military. And then you get your one phone call. That one phone call, there's still people out there yelling and screaming. You either call your parents, you call your loved ones, your spouse, whatever the case may be. In my case, it was the call home to my wife just to let her know that I arrived safely. That was all I was going to get. That's all I got. And the phone hung up, and it was go to work. I'm not going to give you a play-by-play of everything that we do in boot camp, but I will give you some highlights. And so part of those highlights are, number one, you are going to take a piss test. And that's the first stage of weeding people out. Because if you were dumb enough to smoke or do something else that was going to pop on a piss test when you knew that you were going to take one the minute you showed up, well, you're a moron and you deserve to get the fuck out anyway, because you're just going to be a problem later on. So that gets done. You get your hair cut, and no fancy shit when you first show up, right? It's everything that you've seen on the television as far as boot camp haircuts go. The initial boot camp haircut, it is all going and is gone. Now, females, they had long hair. It was getting cut to their shoulder. Didn't matter how long that shit was. It was coming off. Now, these days, it's a little different. Now, the males still get their hair shaved all the way down to the scalp, but the females get a little bit of leeway, because if they can tuck that shit, pin it up somewhere, and in some cases, outside of boot camp, I'm pretty sure you can wear it down as long as it's in a ponytail, which to me, I think is the worst decision that we ever made. Hopefully that's changed back to the way it was. But I know there was a time where the uniform regulations changed and everybody's getting to do whatever the hell they want. But when I went in, it was old school. So shave that head. The next thing you do is the moment of truth is what they call it. This is your final chance to divulge anything that you failed to divulge to the recruiter or the classifier on your way to boot camp. Depending on how bad that would be, how severe those facts that they were looking for that you didn't divulge in the beginning, would determine whether or not they were going to keep you or if they were just going to kick you out right then and there and send you packing. So that takes place. You do a little bit of training, a lot of administrative work is going on, a lot of sleeping in between. Every time there was a lull, they would say, hey, put your head on the desk and you can go to sleep. And then as soon as somebody walked in and saw everybody's heads down, then they would wake your ass up because, well, that was part of the process. You weren't going to be allowed to sleep, but you were going to have some hope that there was sleep available. It wasn't happening. So beyond that, you're learning different things along the way. Number one, you're learning how to shut the fuck up because there's only one person that's going to be talking, and that's the person giving the instructions. And at no point in time, unless you're asked a question, are you going to open your mouth? And there's a reason for that, right? You're given instructions. Everybody needs to hear those instructions. Everybody's going to follow those instructions. And if any of you don't, you will pay for it as a group. And so the team building begins. And it's satisfying to know that being on both sides of that table, that I understand that. And at 22 years old in boot camp, I understood it as well. But it's frustrating when you've got 17-year-olds can go in as long as they're signed and waived by their parents, and they will turn 18 before they graduate boot camp. So 17, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds and 22-year-olds. And believe it or not, I've had experiences with leading 39-year-old recruits. And so I always thought, it's the 22-year-old. I'm the old dude. Nah, that wasn't the case. And it usually never is, because 39 is the cutoff, and there's always one or two 39-year-olds running around boot camp trying to figure out their life. Well, good for them. But frustrating just the same. You're dealing with people from everywhere. And if you're not a people person, if you don't get along well with others, you are not going to make it, and you will struggle in the beginning. And there was a lot of struggling going on. Of course there was. Nobody knows anybody. Everybody comes from different cultures. You've got some crybabies in there. You've got some obstinate people who think they know everything and don't want to listen. And then there was people like me who had a purpose, who understood the method to the madness. Even though I hadn't sat on the other side of that table yet, I still understood, and I was mature enough. And by no means was I mature, but I was mature enough at the moment to understand that. And so the following weeks are played out a little bit of team building, a lot of extra exercise. They called it making it rain or cycling. When I got there as an instructor, they called it intensive training exercises. So lots of names, but all the same thing. They're going to whip your ass into shape. They're going to break you down. They're going to make you cry. They're going to build you back up and make you stronger than you were before, to the point where you're looking people in the eye, you're shaking their hand and gripping like a man when you do it. So boot camp is a great place to change people. Now, it doesn't change everybody, but the majority of the folks that go in, they understand what the experience is supposed to be. They don't know how to navigate it yet, but that's why it's there for 9 weeks, to understand along the way in phases, because there are phases of how that happens. And so you're getting firearms training. You are understanding the chain of command from the president down to your recruit division commander, and you're the low man on the totem pole. You have to memorize all that stuff. You have to memorize all of these rules and these regulations. You got to learn all the ranks, right? Because you can't be calling out somebody the wrong rank, because that's just wrong. But because it's the Navy, swimming is a major component, regardless of where you were going or what your future platform was going to be, because everybody gets trained the same. That's the best part about military life, is the standardization that goes into it. The fact that everybody's learning everything the same way and they're going out the door with the same knowledge is important. You've got ships and compartments inside those ships because they're trying to train you to be a sailor. So that's what they call those things. But in any case, it's barracks, and it's where you sleep with 88 other people, all males on one side. If you're integrated division, your female counterparts were over on the other side, and you all would split up and come together later on. Now, you're definitely not sleeping together. It's not co-ed. It may never be co-ed. I hope it's not. But no, you have co-ed ships. You don't have co-ed compartments. So I was lucky enough to be in an all-male division, because being in a integrated division with females is challenging. And not because they're required to do things different because they're females, because they're not. Because the standardization process gets rid of all that special attention. Sure, were they allowed to do some things different? Obviously, because they're female. Males don't have the same issues that females do physically, but mentally, you're going to get trained the same way. Everything that's going into here is going into everybody, regardless of gender. And so that part didn't matter. And they put a lot of emphasis on the amount of teamwork that you have inside your divisions, inside of those companies, or whatever you want to call them these days. But when you have those groups of recruits, the potential for them to be great is really based on the weakest link. And so what they train you during that time is, hey, you know what? If you guys want to be better, then you need to pick up your weakest link. You need to help them up. You need to help train them to where you're at if you feel like you're meeting the standard. Because there's going to be people that don't meet the standard. But what's important is they train you to identify where the help is needed in that team, be a team player, help those folks out. So you're all out on a level playing field. And then the emphasis on how well you do is graded. And that grading criteria comes from inspectors coming to basically dress you down. They know all the regulations. They know how the uniform is supposed to be worn. They know all the answers to the questions that you're being asked. They are the ones that are trying to determine, are you where you need to be at this phase in training? And so from time to time, you would have inspections. And what happens is you have mock inspections prior to the actual inspection taking place. And the intention there is to make sure that we either are successful together or we're going to fail together. And what happens is there might be somebody who thinks that we're going to grade on a curve and they're going to do the least amount of work possible and just kind of skate by. And that doesn't work in the military. And so what is commonly put on the rest of the recruits is to make sure that you bring that person up to the level where they need to be, or y'all going to suffer for it. And so guilty by association type of thing. So there are people who want to try to skirt by and they just want to do the bare minimum. And it was your job as a fellow recruit to identify that and create some motivation. Because if your bunkmate was failing a bunk inspection or a uniform inspection and you're standing next to them, you're going to take it. And you're either going to take it for them or you're going to take it with them. And so it's on you to understand that leaning on each other to be better is an important part of that process, because ultimately, and not like the Navy goes out and is in the desert fighting the Taliban side by side, unless you're a Navy SEAL or you're embedded into one of them special operations commands. But you're still out there doing something where you're in harm's way, regardless if you're in conflict, out of conflict, or just fighting a fire on board a ship in the middle of the ocean, right? You got to know that you can count on that person next to you because they trained as hard as you did. So we don't let up for that. And that's part of the process too. So all of those things work into boot camp. You get some downtime towards the end where you're doing what they call service week, and they give you an opportunity to go do some jobs that you're normally going to be doing outside of boot camp. And some of those things is like scullery, which is basically washing dishes and doing galley work at the cafeteria, but you're spread out during that week. The majority of people, they go do that. And some of us, and I was lucky, I was one of those, I didn't have to do any of it. I worked on the division flag because I designed it, number one. And secondly, I got to get a head start on some training that was supposed to happen after service week. So then that way I could stand some watches, which was pretty awesome. I didn't really want to do that, but at least I didn't have to go wash dishes and shit. That part of boot camp is kind of mundane. Everything leading up to it, learning how to march, learning how to work with each other to march in step, because you're getting graded on that. A lot of what you do is for your final night and for graduation, and then to take with you when you go out into the fleet and start working at that first job. And now you're relied upon to know what you need to know, to understand that you're not doing it alone and that you have to work with your peers in order to be successful. So learning how to march, never used it outside of boot camp. But what it does create is your ability to understand that you look better as a group when you all are on the same page. And so you can refine how you appear outwardly to other people. Even if you were just in a shop and you worked with like 10 other folks, but you all were doing the same thing. You were doing it correctly. You were being clean about it. You were a consummate professional that you made being the best at that job priority number one. And so if everybody's on the same page and everybody's doing that, then hell, why wouldn't you be successful? So the marching thing, sure, didn't use it, understood the process, and does it look good on that morning when you're marching on the parade deck for your family members who are watching you graduate your last day of boot camp? Of course it does. But if you think that's the only reason that you learned how to march, you're sadly mistaken. And then, of course, all the shipboard stuff. Still the same basic core concepts of working with other people and understanding their structure and standard to how you execute and how you follow the process and the procedures. But I never was aboard ship. And in the 24 years that I was in the service, I only saw them from the sky. So I was pretty blessed I didn't have to do that. A lot of folks, they dig it and they get into it. And that's great. And they do amazing. So there's the shipboard stuff. The final night is basically you're up all night. They put you in all these different scenarios. It's a lot deeper and more complex now than it ever used to be. They call it battle stations. They started battle stations back right before I got to boot camp during that year. And what it was is you just go from station to station. And in our case, we were humping it. I mean, we weren't centrally located and doing all of these tasks in the same place. First off, you're getting woke up at like 2200 and, somebody's coming in with a trash can, they're banging it up. This is your capstone event. So they're going to make it as real as possible. Although they had what they had to work with. These days, it's an amazing simulation that they have. And I was privileged enough to be able to work on it and bring recruits through it, which I'll talk more about later. But in this case, you're running from station to station. I must have run like 20 miles that day with a sea bag on my back full of gear, and you're making uniform changes and you're getting wet and you're changing into dry clothes, all these things. And it lasts until 9 o'clock the next morning. It's never ending. And what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to be a culmination of all the training that you've had up to that point, all in one place, and to test your knowledge, to test your practical awareness and everything that you've learned. So whether it be shooting or shipboard type stuff, first aid, CPR, carrying a dummy through an obstacle course, those types of things, those were important parts of the training process. Now, nobody was going to fail. It wasn't kind of like a pass or fail type of thing, but it was just kind of, hey, just so you know, this is the real shit. And this is as real as we're going to be able to give it to you. But if you can pass this at a minimum, then you're going to be prepared for, at least somewhat prepared for whatever is going to be thrown at you in the real world out in the fleet. And so that's done. And then you realize that you're stuck in this little area with 87 other people that might be like-minded for the time being, but that's not where they came from, and some of that comes out when you're together and you're tired and you're getting beat up mentally all the time. Your personality comes out, and sometimes it's like being hangry. You don't want to see me when I'm hangry. And so it's kind of the same thing, right? I mean, you're being told what to do, when to do it, how to do it, where to do it, and who to do it with. And it does get to be a lot at a certain point. And frustrations do come out, but they come out mostly in the beginning. You don't know these people yet, and you're still trying to navigate who the ones are that you do want to associate yourself with and who are the ones that are going to need a little extra help. But about midway through, you're on week 4 or 5 and things start coming together. You're making less mistakes, but by no means are you perfect or ever will be. That's the point. And so by the time you're done, everybody's great friends. We're going to keep in touch, and we'll see you at the next school, and hopefully we'll see you at whatever command I'm going to, because nobody knows, right? You don't know where your ultimate duty station is, and you won't know until you're done with A school, which is your follow-on career school. And in my case, it was airframe mechanic, and that was guaranteed. That was one of the things that I was talking about. Make sure that you get a guaranteed job. So you're not just throwing in script and paint off the side of the boat. I kept hearing that over and over again. In any case, you get to know those people, those 87 other recruits. And there's a bond there that you find out even throughout the rest of your enlistment or the rest of your career, however long you stayed in, that they're unbreakable, and they may not be close, and you can go on a hiatus from someone that you served with for years and still come back and have a conversation like you just saw each other yesterday. And that's that common bond, that cadre of people that you know exists, and it's unlike any other in the world as far as I'm concerned. And it's not just the Navy, it's any military branch has that same kind of idea. And that's the important takeaway from joining military service, as I think a lot of you understand. If you whether or not you're a first responder or a military member, retired, a veteran, it doesn't matter. It's all the same. You guys know where this conversation's coming from. You've been there, you've done that, and most of us got the T-shirt. So boot camp finishes, and I move on to my A school. A school is another 8 weeks. down in Pensacola, Florida, where the aviation schools are. And then I have to go to the platform that I'm going to. But I was lucky enough to get stationed on shore duty, which was really weird. I still, to this day, I can't figure out how I pulled shore duty as my first rotation. But in any case, Lemoore, California, there's a naval jet station there. And it's one of the largest ones in the nation. And so that's where the Super Hornet first had their training squadron. That's where they came to be. And that was one of the first places that they flew those out of once they were out of production. Just a little trivia. I didn't go to a jet to work on. So first off, en route to Lemoore, I go to Camp Pendleton. I'm the only Navy guy, I feel like, on that entire base that's learning how to work on an old antiquated aircraft, which was the HH-1N, a utility Huey. So what they did have was they had the four-bladed, which was like the Super Huey. They had the standard Hueys there. And of course, the whiskey, they call it, which is the Cobra. And so I got a chance to kind of do some practicals and work on some of that stuff just because the platform I was going to was primarily helicopter. And it was an experience in itself. And, sometimes I wonder, like, how deep do I want to go into this? I want to talk about some of the fun shit I did while I was there. I mean, Camp Pendleton's in San Diego, so do the math. But once I was finished, right, I was a full-fledged devil duck, they call me. Only Navy guy in the entire class. We'd go on long runs, and I'd be leading the pack. And they're like, oh, yeah, you could be a devil duck. You'd be our devil duck. And I'm just like, dude, really? I don't even care, man. That's the dumbest shit I ever heard in my life. But hey, man, that's what the devil dogs wanted to call me. That's what they called me. So I make the Lemoore, bring my family down. I'm there for a couple of years, and I am learning all that I can about being in real world Navy, which really wasn't nothing. I in a way, I feel like I got cheated, but on the other hand, I'm like, hey, I was on shore duty. I didn't have to go to a boat. Easy peasy, right? So I learned a lot, though. I got to fly on a helicopter. I got to work on a helicopter. I got to hook stuff to the hoist of a helicopter during air shows so they could drop this beat up old jalopy from the sky. I don't know how cool that was, but for some people, I guess it was. When you live out in the middle of nowhere, anything's cool. But fun fact, on my way from Camp Pendleton to Lemoore, me and my classmates, all of them Marines, wanted to go to Tijuana. And I was the only one old enough to rent a car. So I rented a car, and we all jumped in it and went down to Tijuana and stayed there through the night, driving back through the border first thing in the morning on our way to Valencia because these knuckleheads want to go ride roller coasters right after all that. Me, I stayed in the fucking hotel, man, because I was so hungover. Such a dumb shit. But in any case, when it was all over and we drove back, I was like, oh my God, man, how are we getting back? I think they took the bus back to the barracks, which, oh, by the way, we're Open Bay barracks. That I was like, I thought this boot camp shit was over, but the Marines do it differently. I guess they stay in Open Bay barracks everywhere. It's just you and, 100 other dudes in the same place, like housed like machinery in a warehouse. And the only thing separating you from another dude is one of them shitty ass wool blankets. Not ideal. But so they all jumped on the bus and bailed while I was turning the car in and making sure it was good. And I was like, what am I going to do, man? This is ridiculous. I don't even know where the bug came from that went up my ass to have me walk across the street to look at used cars, but it was there and it flew right up my ass. And I went over there and I looked at a couple cars. And I settled on a single cab, a 1994. So it was at the time it was only it was 98. Yep, it was 98. So we'll say almost 4-year-old Ford Ranger, fucking Ford Ranger. And I mean, it wasn't my first choice though. I mean, I was going to buy a Saturn. I'm glad I didn't, but I bought this pickup truck. And being 22 years old, being just married and not understanding what marriage was as far as communication goes, I went ahead and bought it, and I didn't tell my wife about it until at some point I made it back to the barracks after all the paperwork's done. And yes, if you're wondering, it was one of those shady places right outside the main gate that they tell you not to go to. And I got ass raped, right? I think it was 19% interest rate, and I ended up paying way more for that truck than it was worth, but that's neither here nor there. It's all in the past. But what I will tell you is I made a phone call on that pay phone outside of my barracks. And yes, pay phone. You got to remember what year this is. And let's just say that conversation didn't go well. It didn't last very long. I know that for sure because the words out of my mouth is like, hey, I just bought a truck. And then I'm pretty sure there was a little bit of silence after that, maybe some cursing, and then the receiver being slammed down because you could still do that back in the day. In any case, it did, like, from the time that it took me to walk from the payphone outside the barracks, and I only laugh now because it is funny looking back, but at the time it was serious because it was very irresponsible of me. I would have never admitted that back then, but for sure, looking back on it now and having children at that, like the same age that I was when that happened, I can 100% wholeheartedly say that that was the dumbest shit I ever did, or at least one of the dumbest things I ever done. But what I will say is that I didn't even make it back to the barracks before somebody grabbed me and said, hey, Sergeant Major is looking for you. And I was like, what? And so I had to go see Sergeant Major. Is it Sergeant Major or Top or somebody? I don't know, man. All I know is that there was some leadership standing in the office when I walked in, and it was intimidating. I was having flashbacks to boot camp, and apparently my wife had called, and she distraught, man. She had every right to be, right? She was pregnant with our second kid, and I went out and I spent some money that we didn't have. Unfortunately, there was no cooling off period for a vehicle, so I couldn't take it back. The whole reason why I brought this up was because while I was stationed in Lemoore and working during the day on helicopters, I would leave, I would go home, I would change into my Pizza Hut outfit, and I would drive that truck that I shouldn't have bought to the Pizza Hut in downtown Lemoore, and I would deliver pizzas, I would clean the dining room, I would make pizzas, and I would wash dishes, all of those things, because it was necessary. And it lasted at least until my wife got a job that paid well, to where I didn't have to do that. But it was a learning experience, and it changed me as a person, at least a little bit, to understand that when you're committed to life with somebody else, making decisions like that, you definitely don't make them in a vacuum. And so I did. So yes, I spent 2 years in Lemoore. And at some point during that 2 years before my enlistment was up, because it was so short, just because it was shore duty and I was at a lesser rank, even though I did go to shore duty first, my time was coming pretty quick to determine what was I going to do next. And my enlistment wasn't even up because I still had a 4-year commitment. At some point in time, a large aircraft breaks down on the T line, which is the transient line, which is where our hangar was at. And it was this huge, it was like, I didn't even know these things existed. And when it was there, I didn't know it was broke down at the time. I would come to find out later that those things break down a lot, but it was a P-3 Orion, and it was an old school, for those of you who don't know, it was an old school 1960s era, 50s era. It's like, so let's put it this way. The P-3 Orion, for those of you that didn't know, a little bit of trivia, was one of the aircraft out there searching for submarines and enforcing the embargo during the Bay of Pigs back then with Cuba. And of course, their primary focus was maritime patrol and reconnaissance, and mostly subhunting, especially during the Cold War. So specifically for the Cold War. And so these airplanes were still around, and I look at them and thinking back to it now, I mean, I was still enamored. It didn't matter that it seemed old, looked old to me. I thought it was pretty cool. One of the mechanics that I served with at that search and rescue squadron that I was at, he had already put in a package to become an air crewman on the 707 version as a flight engineer. And those are in Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma City. He's like, you should do it too. Do what? I didn't even know you could do anything. I thought this was my job, and this is what I'm supposed to do for the next 4 years. And then I'm going to get out, and then I'm going to go do this CAD thing. And he's like, no, I think you should do it. And so he bent my ear about it. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. I mean, especially if I could go fly in the commercial world, you go fly on an airline or something like that. Because it looked like an airliner. The 707s, they're being used. And even if they weren't, there had to have been some opportunities out in the commercial airline world at the time where an aircraft, even like 737s, I think back in the day, originally had flight engineers. So it's like, sure, I'll give it a go. So, I put all the essential paperwork together because military is very administratively focused. And so I had to put a package in, and I had to get clearance, and I had to get recommendations, and I had to do this medical stuff because you got to get medically cleared in order to be able to fly. So I did all those things, and not to go into anything really deep, but what happened was they lost my paperwork. Not to mention the fact that before I joined the Navy, I got a DWI, and it was when I was 19 years old. It was in my record, and I divulged it during the enlistment process, so it wasn't like it was something that wasn't there. But the flight surgeon, when I filled out the questionnaire, it says, have you ever? And it's not like, have you in the last couple of years? It was, have you ever? So that kind of leaves it open for your entire life. And so there was something in there about drinking. And of course, I had to write it in there, and I'm like, hey, I got DWI, blah, blah, blah. And so he looks at that, and he's new. You can tell he's new. I could smell how new his uniform was. That's how new he was to the Navy. And by the way, right, medical folks just don't instantaneously become medical officers when they come into the military. They're recruited already as medical professionals. So not to say that he didn't know what he was doing. I just don't think that he understood the rules that he was being guided by as far as the regulations go when admitting somebody into a program or whatnot. In any case, he fucked my shit up. And he said that I had like an alcohol abstaining problem that I was recovering from. Like this craziness. I'm not even sure. I think I was sober at the time. I'm pretty sure I was. I was going through this thing. I probably had like a year sober. And I wasn't even an alcoholic. I was like, man, this is something I need to do, get my life together. And so I had to get a waiver. I had to get a waiver because of it. And I don't even understand why. I mean, I got waived already just to come into the damn military to begin with for the drugs and for the DWI. I had to talk to a regional commander of the Southwest region on the phone to get a phone waiver so I could get in. And this guy was making my life even more difficult. But long story short, I get the waiver. That took a little extra time. I was talking to the detailer throughout this whole process. He said, hey, as soon as I receive the package, we'll put you in for this duty as a flight engineer on this aircraft. And I was like, sweet. But then it got lost. I had to resubmit. And by the time that the paperwork got where it needed to go, there was no more job openings left for that particular aircraft. But he's like, hey, and I remember too, because Senior Chief Sailor was my detailer. And I just thought it was funny because his last name was Sailor. But in any case, he's like, hey, I don't have anything for you on this aircraft, but I do have P-3 flight engineer openings. You'll have to go to Jacksonville, Florida for training. You'll have to go through aircrew school first. And then before that, you got to go to SEER school in San Diego. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. What's going on here? I've seen a P-3. I didn't go inside of it. I didn't know what it looked like other than what I saw on the outside, and the fact that it was sitting in a place that P-3s don't normally come, probably because they have a catastrophic whatever failure because it was built in 1970 and it was older than me. And do I want to be on an aircraft like that? I'm like, wow, man, another big decision I had to make. And on top of that, I was like, well, what are my commitments? What commitment do I have to give in order to be able to go through with this? Because they're not going to put me through all this training and then say, oh, no, you're good. You're still going to get out in October of 2001. No problem. Give us your 4 years. Well, it didn't matter anyway, because there was a reason why I re-enlisted anyhow. And we all know what that is. But in any case, I said, you know what? Fuck it. Let's do it. So I get the orders. I had pack up my family, get them ready to go. But of course, I've got some en route stuff that I got to do. So they got to stay behind for a little while before they move out of the base housing that we're in. We called it Flintstone Village because all of the houses were flat. They were built in the 50s. And it's back when you can open up the medicine cabinet and stick your old razor blades in the little slot back there. Anyway, nice little side note. So I traveled down to San Diego. I go to SEER school. All I can tell you that if you've never been to SEER school, I think everybody should experience it. I think Red Dawn would have went differently if those kids had some SEER training. Now, in any case, seriously though, great training. I think it's super important that you understand what could potentially happen and what kind of processes you should be instilling in yourself and understanding along the way in order to keep you safe and alive, to be able to make it back home to your family if you're ever captured in a real life POW situation. So very important training. Did mine in San Diego and Warner Springs. Quite the experience. I mean, I can't say more than that because I'm pretty sure that we're not allowed to talk about it like that. But I can tell you that I learned a lot of great things about living off the land, being able to navigate, understanding how to evade and not skyline, how to hide from people, and how to tolerate the life that you would be living if you were in a concentration camp. Doug Hegdahl came and spoke to us. He was a seaman during the Vietnam War that fell overboard, got picked up by Vietnamese fishermen, but ended up at the Hanoi Hilton. And so kind of a rock star, the guy memorized everybody's name because he was the lowest man on the totem pole. They let him go because it didn't make sense to hold on to an enlisted guy that didn't know shit, right? So they had a bunch of John McCains there anyway, so it didn't even matter. So they let him go. But before he did, he memorized everybody's name. He kind of turned it into a song so that way he could get back to the people that needed to know whether or not their loved one was alive, including the Navy and the Marine Corps and whoever else was involved, and say, hey, listen, these are who's there now. And this is the condition that they're in. So probably one of the greatest feats ever. There were so many POWs at the camp. But I got to meet them during SEER school, so that's a nice little tidbit of information. Of course, that always happens at the end. And they basically grade you. At the end, they say, you did well here. You resisted here. You resisted a little too much here. You probably would have died. But, so many different scenarios that they put you through. I think it's great. But it's almost like a mini boot camp, only worse. And it's only done in a matter of 7 days. And the worst of it only happens in a span of 24 hours that feels like 124 hours. I remember when they debrief you, they get everybody in the room. They're like, listen, all right, so this is the things you need to avoid. Don't go into crowded places because you're going to start hearing shit. You're going to start feeling a certain way. You're going to have instant PTSD. And it's not something that stays with you forever, but it's because it's so fresh that it's just going to happen. They also say, because you haven't eaten anything for so long, don't go out and eat spicy shit. It's going to tear up your stomach and you're going to regret it. So still young at the time. And I remember I was staying in a hotel and my wife was going to meet me. And she tells the story all the time. She says, when I opened up the door to let her in, she almost fell out and broke down in tears because I was so emaciated and I hadn't eaten anything. But I feel like I did before she showed up. I'm pretty sure, man. There was a Filiberto's, Iliberto's or something like that. I had myself a big-ass burrito, probably a taco, lots of hot sauce, all these wonderful things. And yeah, I paid for it, but I was willing to pay that price. So SEER is a real thing. And even in a small amount of time, I look like a POW by the time my wife saw me. And she'll never forget when I opened up the door what I look like. In any case, next step, I traveled to Pensacola, back to Pensacola again for aircrew school, where I learned how to drown-proof different ways, do a mile swim in full combat gear, do the helo dunker, do all those things that a lot of us know and love and or have heard about, right? So, I got an opportunity to do some things that I can say probably not a lot of people have an opportunity to do. But that was only 4 weeks. Once again, when you're doing training like that, it feels like forever. I mean, you're PTing all the time. You're sweating your ass off. It's Florida. It's humid. I enjoyed my time there. I was also a little bit further along in rank. I think I was a petty officer 3rd class at the time. So I was an E4 when I showed up. And so I had a lot more freedom. They were more liberal with how me and they call us fleet returnees were as far as being stringent and following the rules that regular aircrew students who hadn't even gone out into the real world yet had an opportunity to do. So, lucky for us, we didn't have to abide by a lot of those rules, curfew and all that shit. So we were able to go and do what we want. We didn't even stay in the same barracks. So they were still treating them like boot camp style. But what I do know is that aircrew school, another great training platform. It doesn't matter what aircraft you're going to, whether it's helos, fixed wing. Most of the training is the same, and it's an experience. Let's just put it that way. So then we arrive at my time in Jacksonville, which is my next permanent duty station for the future to come. But in this case, I'm there because I'm training. I'm training to be a flight engineer. So everything else is done. Now I need to learn what my job is going to be while I'm flying. And it's a pretty arduous training, mostly because it's a lot of rote memorization, a lot of practical monkey skills that you need to know, emergency procedures, normal procedures, all those things. So everybody that goes through any kind of training, especially something like that, a job that the community is so small and it's coveted, so to speak, you're going to have a rough go at it, especially if you don't take it seriously. I think a lot of things should be like that these days, especially when it comes to training, learning something. It's important, especially when it involves making sure that the lives of the other up to 22 people on board that aircraft come back safe and sound, all 10 fingers and 10 toes still attached type of thing. So yes, was it hard? It most definitely was. There was a lot to learn. And not even 8 months could you pack enough training into that small amount of time, considering how important the job was and all that it entailed. And they understood that because you couldn't even get 100% qualified until you got to your final destination at the command where you were going to be stationed, and you got qualified there. You got a certain time limit that you are given to get qualified, typically around anywhere between 6 to 18 months, depending on how fast a learner you are, and if you're going to be engaged enough to take charge of your own destiny and your training, which in my case, I didn't. I can honestly say back then, I thought I was done with the initial training and I was just going to rest on my laurels and try to figure out this new Navy life that I found myself in that was so different from the one that I came from. And of course, that happens every time you go someplace different, but not in the case of this particular community. But I didn't know that at the time. What I did know was that I was not comfortable. And not to say that you should be comfortable at any point in time when serving your country. There should be a little bit of asshole puckering, especially when it comes to knowing, certain things that are going to keep people alive. And I keep saying that, but it's understating the obvious. Honestly, that's what the military is all about. Serving your country, serving the folks that you surround yourself with, and being a good ambassador to the rest of the world. Wow, that was kind of an advertisement. But no, that's truly how I feel. But back to it, I was a slow burner. And it took me a while to finally get to a point where I understood what the hell I was learning. I think part of the fact that I just couldn't grasp it in the beginning was really starting to deter my motivation to do well. And then once I finally caught on and things started kind of falling into place, clicking together, I think that's when it really started to smooth out. And I was pretty much ready for anything. And that first year in May of 2001, I finished up with the training. And so here I am stationed still in Jacksonville with a squadron called the Mad Foxes VP5. And from May until August, we were prepping to deploy. And our deployment spot was Sicily. And I can't remember if we detached to other places, but our primary deployment spot was Sigonella, Sicily, NAS Sigonella. And so this would not be the first time that I went overseas, because I didn't mention it when I was going through training. To become a flight engineer, they would do what they would call nav extends. I almost forgot what the hell they called them. But nav extends were basically a long distance training, mostly for navigators and some other folks that were going through the program as students, namely pilots and a couple of the tactical folks, the officers in the back. And so in order to get good training, you do long distance navigation. It's also part of the pilot syllabus. And sure enough, flight engineers got to get their share as well, because there's a lot of flight planning that goes into leaving the continental United States and flying anywhere over the ocean. So great experience. But mine, luckily enough, our destination for that particular thing was Amsterdam. And so Valkenburg, Netherlands, really, but we were staying in the city of Amsterdam because they have a satellite barracks there. And that's where we ended up staying with the Dutch Navy, which was pretty cool. So while I was there, great time. That's a whole story in itself. If anybody knows anything about Amsterdam, they know what I'm talking about. Anyway, Sigonella, Sicily is where we're about to deploy. And so a lot of training goes into that before, and we do what we call workups and a lot more training flights, getting the aircraft ready. There was a lot to do. So from May until August, that's all we were doing. Prep, right? Also, you get some kind of pre-deployment leave. So that was the other thing. You get a little time off before you leave your family. Make sure you're giving all the kisses and hugs that you can, because you won't see them for 6 months. And so keep in mind the fact that the internet started becoming very popular, 98, 99 timeframe, but maybe a little bit before that. So my wife was almost full-blown pregnant, ready to give birth in August. And it is what it is. She had my son. Luckily, I was on shore duty and I was around for that. A very special event, of course. If you haven't had the opportunity to experience it, childbirth, I highly recommend it. I don't. But in any case, so my wife was almost there, and the due date was around late August. So we had already kind of understood that there was a possibility I wasn't going to be able to hang back and join my command later on. So I was going to miss this one. And we discussed it, and it wasn't really that big of a deal, at least not at the time. So beginning of August, I believe I got on an airplane headed for my first overseas deployment ever on August 4th. And we get there and I'm learning everything. And I've never been to Sicily. Apparently, goat and sheep mate and they make geep. I don't know if you can find them anywhere else, but I think it's a big thing in Sicily. So those of you who've been, you understand, you know. And now it's like people who'd been there before, you know, that's what they talk about. They're like, oh yeah, there's this and this and that and the other. And they're not even talking about touristy stuff. They're just talking about like what a military person would probably get from all that. It's like, we're not here for any of that, but we're not here to be tourists, but if you want, here's some good to know facts. Don't go here. Don't talk to these people. And for me, I didn't even care. It was my first deployment and I didn't have high expectations. I was just there to do a job and get qualified. And I was worried that I wasn't going to get qualified. It's just a very daunting task for me. You know, looking back on it now, I was worried for nothing. And I put it off for so long, it just made it worse. Talk about slow burn. So 3 weeks in, flying off the coast of Syria in the Mediterranean, and we're just doing some aerial reconnaissance and maybe a little bit of training on the side. I think we all do a little bit of that coastal dragging, so to speak. I don't know if any other foreign entities fly off the coast of the United States of America. I can't imagine if we're doing it, why wouldn't they? You know, so yes, we were doing something off the coast of Syria, and I'd been on several flights, several missions that were kind of innocuous. You're just flying around circles for the most part, maybe doing some dry runs on some bombing simulations, and you know, you're pretending to hunt for a submarine and you're dropping sonar buoys, and everybody's getting their training because half the crew is not qualified and the other half is their instructors. All I know is at some point during that flight off the coast of Syria, and I don't remember if I was in the center seat or if I was in the back, maybe getting some rest. But what I do remember is that we got called back early. And for me, it was like, woo, right? Most of the time, the flights are like 10 hours. This is a big airplane, carries a lot of fuel. We can spend a lot of time in the air, especially if we shut an engine down, especially if we shut 2 engines down. We got 4 of them. So going home early, and even though I was 3 weeks in, I can't even believe that, you know, that was in my brain. I'm like, oh, cool. You know, they cut it short. You get to go back to the barracks and sit around and do nothing thousands of miles away from my family for the rest of the day. Not really much to look forward to, but I guess it's better than kind of counting the waves as they ripple across this endless ocean, or rather a sea. So we turn around, we go home, RTB they call it, return to base. And I think it was like maybe 2.5 hour travel time. So the whole time you start hearing the buzz through the tube, we called it, the interior of the aircraft, and you got some speculation, and some people are going, oh my God, we broke standoff. 12 miles out from any shoreline of any sovereign country is considered the boundary for international waters, for those of you that didn't know. And you're not supposed to go inside of that unless you have specific permission or a flight plan filed. And a lot of times when you're doing that kind of stuff, you just kind of skirt the line. So, and you know, you got a new navigator and maybe they screwed up. You don't know. So a lot of speculation going on there. No information was given to us from home base about why we were being cut short on our mission and why we needed to come directly home. But it was the utmost urgency, and we weren't given much else than that. And I remember landing back at the airbase, and as we're getting closer to the hangar, I noticed that the hangars are all closed up. It's weird. It's eerie. Like there's not a lot of people on the base, it feels like, but there's some sentries walking around the flight lanes and outside of the hangars, and they've got flak jackets on. They got helmets. They're carrying semi-automatic weapons. Notice things are a little bit weird. They feel weird. You can just kind of feel when something's happened. It's strange. It's strange. I think the human body is just in tune with that kind of stuff. I'm sure I'm not the only one that was feeling it that day when we landed. We pull into the parking spot, we lower the ladder, and we open the door, and we're already the engines are still kind of coasting down to stop, and the commanding officer and the security officer, and probably a couple more people that I don't remember, come on board, and they gather us around. They tell us to turn off the APU because it's loud as shit. You can't hear to talk. And apparently this was pretty important. And I don't remember the words, but I do remember what I was feeling when I heard them. And it was like everyone else. It was disbelief. And you're so disconnected when you're in another country that you don't, I guess it just doesn't really hit you. I mean, you feel a certain way. But you can't imagine what had been happening for the past 3 or 4 hours that we had missed it. So we got back around maybe three or four in the afternoon. And I can't remember for the life of me if I actually saw the second airplane hit when I finally made it back to the barracks and everybody's doors were open and everybody's TVs were on. If they had a TV, I think we all had them old school tube TVs. But I do remember standing on like the second or third deck outside the door and just listening to the chaos of the news reporters and everybody talking about what was going on, not to mention us and our speculations and just not knowing right at that moment, that day that would change us forever. Before that moment, it was just September 11th. It wasn't 9/11. It wasn't September the 11th. It was September the 11th until about a little after 8 o'clock in the morning, East Coast time. And even when I walked into the room and I'm getting closer to the TV because I want to hear what's going on. And there's a lot of chatter behind me of the folks that are around me also watching this take place. And they just had nothing. All you could do was just watch. Everybody was an observer. And it was a defining moment in my life. And it was a defining moment in history, especially American history. So things changed quite a bit after that. It wasn't long after that day that I would be putting paperwork in to re-enlist. And I mean, it helps when you have a motivator like what happened on 9/11 to keep your feet moving in the direction where you think you should be going. And for me, it became, I wanted what's best for my family. Do I want to keep my family safe? And not that it's not always like that, but I think a more of a surreal moment where you actually think their safety could be in jeopardy. Because when that happened, keep in mind, my daughter was born on August 21st. And it was just a couple weeks later when 9/11 happened. And my wife was on base and they were getting their baby well check. Make sure mom's good, make sure the baby's good. And they locked it down while they were there. And so I can't imagine the panic and not understanding what was going on at first on my wife's end and then everybody back home. I mean, it's a lot of disbelief and being so far away from your family when stuff like that is going on. It's really hard to chew on. And that's why they teach you what they teach you in boot camp is that compartmentalization, and they preach it to you and they just, you think they're overstating it, but it's important that you have that in your life or it's possible things could fall apart because we still have to move forward, and I wasn't worried for my family based on where they were at. But I was worried about how these times were changing to that I would even have to worry in that way at all. Up to that point, I don't think any of us thought very much of it. Like I said, it was peacetime. We weren't in any kind of conflict to speak of. I think we had just gotten out of the Gulf War and we thought that was finished. And so there was a lull, Operation Desert Storm. You can go watch Three Kings and laugh about Mark Wahlberg popping the head off some dude when he shot him. Yeah, but I mean, there really wasn't a care in the world. I think we took a lot for granted. We were like the world superpower and nothing could touch us. And that unfortunately is not true. And we're lucky that at this moment that things aren't worse than they are, because they definitely could be. And we say, never forget. Well, we say never forget because we do need to remember all those people that we lost. And we do need to remember that people can come in here and take something away from us in seconds. And we need to be ready for it at all times. So I think when people say never forget 9/11 is don't be complacent. Don't be complacent. And it's unfortunate that people say, oh, we got to wage war to make peace. In some cases, it's true. And however, it's unfortunate. Anyway, so October, it's a month later, and I'm raising my hand for the second time, but I'm doing it more out of duty and out of understanding that everybody needs to be in this fight. And the feeling that we all had back then is a feeling that I think is also something when somebody says, hey, never forget. I think we were at our best not too long after that. And it's unfortunate that it takes tragedy of that scale to get a country to a point where we were. I won't give a label or a grade one way or the other, but I can say that because of those times, there were better times. And I think a lot of good things come from things that happen like that. And it is unfortunate, but what are you going to do? It's a learning process. So that day over, the next day came, as they always do. and it was time to put my best foot forward and raise my hand one more time. When I was talking to my boys, we were talking about just being in the military and the comparison to another job, or how it takes a certain person to join the military. And I think that's all wrong. I think the way we look at that is all wrong. It doesn't take a certain type of person to want to join military service. It takes a certain type of person to maintain that level of standard in their life and professionalism with them long after their journey's over. Because I can tell you right now, a large portion of the folks who go into the military, they don't learn shit. And they're there to collect a paycheck on the 1st and the 15th. And then when their enlistment's up, kick rocks and go fuck off somewhere down the road. And whether or not they contribute to life afterwards, I don't know. But I can tell you that there are those folks out there. And typically they're the ones that are always toting their insignias and they outwardly saying, "Oh, it's a veteran," in like the worst kind of way. You know, I'm guilty of like wanting to like wear veteran shirts and shit. I refuse to wear a hat. But you know, if you can't look at me and tell whether or not I had been in the military, then that's a tough sell, because a lot of times I think it's easy for us to stand out, even if we're not in anymore. But it's those folks who are always shouting at the top of the rooftops about how they were veterans. I think more often than not, those are the ones that were like, I was in for like 4 years, and probably talk shit about it. I don't know. But on the other side of that, right? It's not a matter of, hey, it takes a certain type of person to want to raise their hand the first time. And it might be different for everybody, but raising your hand the first time is easy because you don't know what you're in store for. You know, you haven't even started the job and you've already been given it with zero resume. So to me, that first raising of the hand to say that oath there prior to getting on that boot camp bus or that airplane to get there, you don't know shit. And so to me, anybody can do that. Now, if you can stay in and maintain everything that you learned from boot camp on and the succeeding years after, even if you go to the end of your first enlistment and call it a day, if you take with you everything that you have learned and all of that understanding and that knowledge, because it is a different type of life, and you move into your civilian life and you kind of adopt a lot of those values and bring them with you into your civilian life, then that's the type of person that joins the military. And of course, those of us who have raised their hand multiple times to the point where they wouldn't let us raise them anymore, but everybody's not built for it. Not everybody, can sustain that type of lifestyle. It's a choice. And some of those choices require lots of sacrifices, and not everybody is built to make those sacrifices. And it has nothing to do with how long you stay in. It really has to do with how you cope with the life in and out and how you are able to succeed after that life. And do those values translate to something that you're doing, whether it be raising your kids or just how you conduct business in your home, how you conduct business outside your home with other people. All of those things, I feel if you're listening, you're paying attention, you're learning, and you're understanding during your time in the military, then to me, if you're only in for a few years, couple years, whatever, and you're applying that outside of that, then you're that type of person. So when they say, hey, it takes a certain type of person to join the military, I disagree. It takes a certain type of person to leave the military and apply all that they had learned outside of it. And just like any other job, that's what the military is. Now, there's a conditioning that takes place that you're not going to get. HR would be totally against how boot camps and initiation processes were run. So definitely not the same in that aspect. But as far as training goes, as far as the actual work goes, it's all the same as any other job out in the field on the civilian side. But everything that encompasses your time in the military, which is your friendships, your values, and how you conduct yourself while you're in, all of those things combined make the job completely different. Not too many jobs will take you overseas and show you multiple countries in a matter of months. So what had I learned up to that point, right? So from boot camp, A school, C school, first command, understanding the training that it takes to get me to the next level, getting there, having something large and tragic happen to completely upend my plans. Because keep in mind, my plans I had in place that I spoke about, that was gone. That wasn't going to happen. Not in my mind. I knew the moment that I signed that re-enlistment paperwork that I'd be signing more times. And it would have been a bad move on my part to say, nope, let me just extend out, finish what I'm doing here, and then go away. Number one, I'm not giving my all to the place where I just showed up at, because they were only going to get me for another maybe 2 years max, maybe. I didn't have to reenlist. I chose to reenlist. And so if you think about it, the motivation of 9/11, no matter how you look at it, no matter what you think of it and how it happened and all those conspiracy theorists out there, whether it was a false flag or that shit actually took place, I don't give a fuck. What's important is that what happened, and the things that happened afterwards needed to happen. Did we get to a certain point where we could have probably drew back a little bit and saved ourselves some people and the trouble? Sure, absolutely. But you just never know. You never know. It's like playing the market. If you're going to invest, you're either all in or you're not. And if you're all in always, then you're never going to know whether or not you made a bad bet. So, and that gets me to my final closing. I understood that this was the life I wanted to live now, that I could do it, and that my kids and my wife, as well as myself, would benefit immensely from sticking to it. And I'm here to tell you, I am grateful. I am grateful to this amazing country that's full of opportunities and the ability to make a choice or change that choice at a moment's notice. We have those freedoms. And when I signed that paperwork, that's what I intended to fight for. Did I raise my hand the first time for that? Absolutely not. And you ask a lot of the guys and gals out there that raised their hand for the first time, and they might tell you something similar. And if they came in when I came in, I bet you they re-enlisted, and some of them are probably still in today. And I love every one of them for it. And I love anybody who is willing to put their life on the line and not even think twice about it. So when we talk about all in always, we talk about those folks that are truly altruists, and they don't even know it. Whether it's a firefighter going into a burning building to save somebody, do you think he's thinking about how he could possibly die? I don't think so. Or a law enforcement officer that has to draw his pistol because he doesn't know if this person with a gun or a knife is going to try to kill him. That's a decision that he has to make in a split second. Think about Marines that go out, and they're fine being infantrymen. Same with the Army, Coast Guard, out there on the worst days. They don't get to take some time off just because the weather's bad. Paramedics, EMTs, their sole job is to save people, stabilize them, get them to the next step, and then move on and do it all over again and expected to go home and put a smile on their face, whether it be by themselves or with their family. And I hope they're not alone. And I hope no first responder is alone, because we all fight an internal battle, and it has a lot to do with the battles that we've seen and experienced in real life. So when you think about that 911 dispatcher, when you're watching a local news station and maybe they have a recording of the 911 call, and one side of that conversation is frantic, panic, tragedy is happening, is about to happen, and that 911 dispatcher is nothing but kindness in the wake of a tsunami. And it takes a certain type of person to do that job. So 911 dispatchers, pray for them because they're suffering. Think about all the people that they talk to that are going through something, and they've got to be the calm and the chaos, so the people on the other end can see the light when it feels like it's only dark. And of course, our military members, all of them. What I learned was that we forget about these people. We forget about our military veterans. We forget about our active military, our reserve military, all branches, all walks of life. Everybody out there doing some of the hardest jobs in places that you and I may never ever see, nor would we want to see. I can tell you, I've seen some pretty fucked up shit and pretty fucked up places. But I know it could be worse. It can always be worse. So the next time that you see bad press about any of that, firefighters in the news did something wrong, or a law enforcement officer that's pushed to do something that nobody agrees with. So not a bystander. It's exactly what it says. And although when you look at it, and I'm looking at it now on the screen because I can see it behind me, I can tell you that the more I look at it, the more I talk about it, the more focused and driven I am about making this a statement more than a brand. And so, not just talking about it, I think it's important that we share our stories. And it's not just for first responders, it's not just for military veterans, it's for everyone. I don't care if you're a family member of any of these groups. If you're just a neighbor or a stranger that's never been impacted by a first responder, you know what they do, you know what they're about. You know why they do it. I just don't think that we think about them enough. I don't think that we think about each other enough. I don't think that we are in a place where we should be right now, because too many of us are bystanders instead of getting involved and taking part and intervening and doing all of those things besides video recording them and posting them on your TikTok. That's bystander behavior. So what you need to be is not a bystander. You need to be somebody who gets involved, who protects your neighbor, who reaches out to a stranger, because that's what is all about being not a bystander. So I'm not a bystander. Are you? Hey, thanks for listening. I know that it gets serious at times, and it's meant to be that way. We will definitely find some light in the darkness together. We will definitely laugh, joke, have a good time, and see the lighter shade of things when it is dark. But we need to remember that there's a seriousness to these jobs for these military members and these first responders that go out and risk their lives every day for strangers and don't even give it a second thought. So I'm looking to you for support for them. I don't even care about this. You want to check it out? You go check it out. But what's important is that whatever you take away from this, you say to yourself, you know what? Maybe I should give a second thought to a first responder. And then next time you see a firefighter, a policeman, or any first responder, reach out. Ask them how they're doing. Ask them a couple questions. They are a wealth of knowledge and some trivia and probably have some really good stories. You may even make a friend. But even if that's not your primary concern, what you should be doing is at least showing them that you're there to support them. And even if that means a shake of the hand, a pat on the shoulder, telling them that they're doing a great job, or the fact that, hey, you know what? I'm interested. What can I do to better understand what it's like for you? And I'll try to help that along by having conversations with first responders during this podcast. And I'm hoping that if I get first responders that are listening to these stories, that maybe more will volunteer to come on this show. But right now, it's just me, and I may not be what you would call a first responder, but I am a military veteran, and I have lived a life for 24 years. And I think that anybody that puts the uniform on, any uniform for that matter, in a manner of public service or government service, should be recognized in some way, shape, or form, and above all else, supported. So thank you, and we'll see you again on the next episode. Hey, thank you for showing up for those who show up for you. We couldn't do it without you. We appreciate you, and we appreciate your support. Until next time, be well, be safe, and we'll see you in the next episode.